Yes, hello again, and welcome back to your number one and favourite classic dirt bike TV channel, where of course we continue to unearth more of those old school vintage scramblers from our racing past. Now, as you know, we've just recently returned from the fantastic two-day Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show, and over the course of the 2 days we did manage to film some very nice machines, and those will be featured here on my channel very soon. So if you've not already subscribed to my channel, then now might be a good time to do that in case you miss out on future videos. Also, a quick hello here to all the subscribers that I've met up with at the Telford show over the course of the 2 days, and thanks once again for your many positive comments with regards my channel content. So coming up next, we're going to go back to the 1960s and take a look at another old vintage scrambler, and this one again belongs to Irishman Cecil Pearson. So without any further delay, let's jump straight into the video and take a look at Cecil's lovely Rickman Metisse Jawa. Now, as you well know, that when it comes to old school vintage scrambling, one of the most popular bikes that are used in the likes of the pre-60s or pre-68 scrambling events is the legendary Rickman framed bikes, made famous of course by the two racing brothers of Don and Derek Rickman, who designed and built these fantastic machines back in the 1960s. Now, back in the day, these Rickman bikes came in kit form, where you would then buy the frame, swing arm and a few smaller bits and pieces as a package, or you could certainly opt for a complete kit that included the frame, swing arm, fiberglass fuel tank, seat and that rear loop at the back, and of course the side panels where you only then had to fit your own suspension, motor and wheels. But the many permutations and different and varied frame kits that you could buy from Rickman at that time was what made these bikes so popular, because it was so easy to customize your own personal machine. Now, our particular featured bike is a Rickman Jawa machine that belongs to Irishman Cecil Pearson, who you may remember has that lovely collection of 1930s Jap scramblers with those unique Rickman frames. But this bike here of Cecil's is certainly no show bike or garage queen. This is a quite well used and authentic Rickman scrambler. Now, as you're no doubt aware, these Rickman frames also held the engine's oil in the frame, and it was filled through this little removable cap on the top of the frame tube. Although, as I said, you can fit almost any kind of motor that takes your fancy into these Rickman chassis, and as you can see here, Cecil's bike is already fitted with a Czechoslovakian Jawa 4-stroke power plant. And when it comes to these big, long stroking Jawa engines, there's certainly no shortage of power or torque with these motors, and that's why they were very widely used in speedway bikes back in the day. But they're still, of course, ideally suited for this kind of pre-65 or pre-68 scrambling machines. And when these Rickman chassis were designed and built back in the 1960s by Don and Derek Rickman, these chassis were without doubt very well engineered and very high quality. But normally I think these Rickman chassis would have held the engine oil for the motor in the frame's top tube, and it was filled through that oil cap that I just showed you, but I'm pretty sure that these big thumper Jawas also had that total loss oil lubrication system on them, which basically meant that you filled the frame with oil and then it was picked up by the little external oil pump here fixed to the right hand side of the engine, where it was then pumped around the motor and then out onto the ground. And in this shot here you can see that external oil pump again fixed to the outside of the engine's casing, and the actual layout of this lubrication system, which was certainly old school and unorthodox, but it was quite reliable, that is, until it ran out of oil. Although I have to say that it was still quite a brilliant idea of the Rickman brothers to use the bike's frame as an oil storage device, and of course it did help keep the overall weight of the bike down to a minimum by not carrying an extra oil storage tank on the machine. But again, these Rickman frames did come with either nickel or chrome plating from the factory, but of course you could customise your very own Rickman frame in whichever colour that took your fancy. Now, once again, exotic motors do need exotic fuel, and naturally these big Jawa engines didn't run on your regular gas, but ran on methanol, mainly because it was said to increase the power of the motor and make the engine just run that little bit cooler, and most importantly, it's also said that it helped prevent pinking or pre-detonation, which a lot of these high compression single cylinder bikes did suffer from time to time. Now, once more, as far as I'm aware, these Rickman bikes did have various different makes of gearboxes fitted to them, and again, I'm not really up to speed with the actual transmission that's fitted here into Cecil's motor, although it does have that matchless oil cap on the outside, although that doesn't really tell me a lot, because these matchless oil caps did fit other makes and models of gearboxes. Although it has to be said that these are very big, torquey single cylinder motors, these big Jawa singles, and as I said, normally fueled by methanol, and the sparks for the motor's ignition are supplied by the bike's magneto that you can see here at the front of the motor cylinder. Once again, a very simple dry clutch assembly on this Jawa engine, and that's connected to the crankshaft by way of a primary chain, which is partially protected by that very light alloy clutch cover. But when you do get this engine fired up, it's probably best to be very careful with regards holding in the clutch for long periods while it's stationary, as they do tend to heat up a little bit, as naturally there's no oil bath to keep them cool. But the actual dry clutch system did work quite well most of the time, and as you'd expect, it was quite an easy fix when it came to maintenance and repair. Now, the bike's front suspension is almost certainly a pair of Italian-made Serianis, as these Seriani suspension systems were widely used on many of these Metisse Rickman bikes back in the day, and for an early 1960s pre-65 or pre-68 race bike, these forks were decent enough for their time. Now, these big alloy brake hubs, again, I'm sure are taken from the old matchless bikes of their time, and these big alloy brake hubs would undergo certain bits of machining to lighten them up and to enable them to fit onto those Seriani forks. But they also did a very good job of helping to slow down what was still a pretty solid old Scrambles race bike. Now, back in the day, all manner of rear shocks would have been bolted onto the back of these Rickman chassis, and it's no surprise here that Cecil's added a set of rock shocks onto his particular machine, as Cecil uses these rock shocks on all of his old dirt bikes, so they must work quite well in that regard, and are normally well suited to these older pre-1965 scramblers. And as you know, these rock shocks are very good quality and very popular on old vintage dirt bikes. Now, if my old aging memory still serves me right, I think this rear wheel on this Rickman Metisse is one of those QD or quick detach affairs that let you remove the back wheel in a matter of seconds or maybe minutes, depending if you're stuck trackside or in the paddock with all of the tools that you need to hand. Now, with regards to the bike's bodywork, including of course the tank, seat, side panels and rear tail cone, these are all, as I said, part of the Rickman frame kit that you can purchase over the counter. But of course, if you don't want the hassle of trying to put together all the bits and pieces yourself, you can certainly get the guys at Rickman to build you a complete machine ready to ride away from the shop. But naturally, you'll need to fork out a bit more of your hard-earned cash in exchange. And again, as another added bonus, you can also specify your own particular machine in just about any colour that takes your fancy, although I have to say that this British racing green seems to suit the 1960s period of these old type scramblers. But the other plus point is that these Rickman Matisses can also be fitted with whichever engine that takes your fancy, from these big Jawa singles to maybe even a B50 BSA or maybe a Triumph Twin. And in fact, even in the past, I've seen these frames fitted with an old Montesa two-stroke motor. So the many different permutations for these bikes are virtually unlimited. Although, to be fair, Cecil did tell me that this big Jawa machine doesn't get the same use as his collection of 9 Rickman Jap scramblers, although this Jawa machine is often taken along to classic race events as a spare bike should any major problems occur with his older 1930s Jap engined race machines. But you just can't help but admire the fantastic engineering that goes into these old Rickman frame bikes, because, as you know, Don and Derek Rickman, who began building these chassis in the 1960s, laid down a lasting legacy that's still going strong even in these modern times. And this Cecil Pearson Rickman Jawa here is just one of thousands of examples of the many engineering talents of the great Don and Derek Rickman. Well, there you have it. I do hope you enjoyed that brief walk around another old school vintage race bike. That's Cecil Pearson's lovely Rickman Matisse Jawa. That's a bike, of course, that is still very popular among the pre-65 and pre-68 vintage racing classes. So coming up on my channel next will of course be part 1 of the many bikes that I captured at the 2022 Telford Classic Dirt Bike Show. Now if you don't want to miss out on any of the very nice bikes that we filmed over the course of the 2 days, and now would be a good time to subscribe to my channel, and that way of course you won't miss out on any future videos that I post here on YouTube. So until the next time, everybody, of course, be safe and well out there if you're managing still to ride those old vintage race bikes over the course of the winter period. But until then, we'll all get back again here quite soon to talk about more vintage iron right here on your #1 and favourite classic dirt bike TV channel.